If you think about it, sort of classic CX design was very much around identifying sort of these micro audiences, building sort of typical customer journeys to identify exactly what you're talking about, like these moments that matter. And then you can create experiences to serve them exactly the right service, the right information at just the right time in exactly the way they need it. And it's wonderful. But I would argue we're actually entering we're already in a moment now where we can know things even beyond that generic journey. Where there's ways of kind of like understanding exactly where they are, and the number of moments that matter can go into the hundreds or thousands, right? They can be these micro moments that we can kind of, because these things are becoming more conversational, because these sort of experiences are able to capture even more data in real time and potentially evolve literally what the experience is in the moment in real time, that even kind of the classic journey mapping that a lot of what you're talking about we used to do, or we still do, I think that's going to evolve now, and the whole thing is going to become very real time. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. Like, I think the metaverse can come back now because generative AI makes it more affordable. I think that a lot of the things that generative AI can do can become more ethical, because I actually think we can track ownership and credit through things like blockchain and the smart contracts that you can do there. I think it's a very interesting blending moment between these two sort of like waves of hype.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of CX with Chopra, where we talk about everything customer experience. And today, to talk about customer experience, I have my guest with me today, Barry Fisk. He's the Chief Experience Officer at Merkle. So he's been at the forefront of the CX transformation, which is happening. I mean, in the last 2 decades, we all have been talking about digital transformation, but I feel now is the time when CX transformation is happening. And he's the one, I believe, right at the driver's seat, driving the whole CX transformation. He's a thought leader. He's a practitioner. He believes in the combined power of technology, design to transform people's lives through experiences. So thank you so much for joining CX with Chopra. And I mean, I would first want to begin with asking you what got you into this role. What's your journey like? And personally,
Yeah.
I want to know, how does somebody become a CXO?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, excited to be talking to you and your audience. How did I become a CXO? It is, I think like any career, sort of a series of planned accidents, I guess, is kind of what I would say. So, I mean, my origin story, like a lot of folks, and like I would actually argue everybody who's even just starting out now, this is the kind of career I think you have to be ready for. Is you kind of have a plan, and then things change, and you have another plan, things change, and you have another plan. But basically, I started out really wanting to be in advertising back, 10,000 years ago. And I wanted to do some of the stuff that I thought was really fantastic that I saw at the time for Nike, and some of these television commercials, and some of the ways that brands talked about the brand, almost making it become like a mission or kind of like a movement, was really powerful for me. And I felt like I had an ability to tell stories, I had an ability to design, and I really liked combining those things. And so that was the first, let's just say quarter of my career, was really doing a lot of that stuff. And I worked for some small places, and eventually I was working with Lee Clow and a bunch of people like that at Chiat Day, TBWA Chiat Day, I should say, and did a lot of things with a lot of, if people are advertising people, famous people back in the day, doing advertising for brands like Apple and Nissan and Sony PlayStation and a whole bunch of things like that. And it was really starting there. But then also I moved and was working at DDB, Doyle Dane Bernbach, doing a similar thing for different clients. It was there that I really started this fascination with digital. I was very, very intrigued with this notion of experiences. And I kind of had this transformational moment where I really recognized that the things that I thought really made me passionate about brands, about products, originally, like I was really sort of attracted to like the shiny object of the advertising. I sort of realized that actually what really attracted me to them and made me loyal and want to talk about them with my friends was the experience that I got from them, and like how well the product back in the day, the product was designed, or how really inventive this service was, or how sort of like unique this service was. And I kind of realized before I even knew it, I later sort of like, would sort of run around, and I found a bunch of people used to talk about how the experience is the brand, or the experience basically sort of needs to represent the brand. And even Lee Clow back in the day talked about how a brand is a promise, but the experience is really how a brand kind of like lives up or keeps its promise for people. And so I started to focus more and more on what is the product, or what is the actual service, or what is, in those days, sort of like the website doing to actually live up to this promise that a brand has made. And what I found back then really was a lot of the companies that I worked for, and the way that I was kind of positioned in these businesses, the digital aspect of it was this kind of sideshow. And so I was running around trying to get people to hire technologists, trying to get people to understand that these are really important too. And I sort of came to a crisis moment, and I thought, maybe what I need to do actually, instead of trying to get this storytelling company to believe in technology, I maybe need to go to a technology company and get them to kind of believe in storytelling. And so this is sort of where our careers, collide a little bit, Arjun.
Yeah.
It's like, so I went to Sapient, which back then was very much a technology company. And there were not a lot of people back then that really kind of understood what I did. They would refer to it as the squishy stuff. You guys, like, here's our flow chart of our project plan, and there's this stuff in the middle. This is the squishy stuff. That's what you do, right? Mm-hmm. And, as we built a creative company basically in the middle of a technology company. And it became like this really powerful combination of what I talk about even now today at Merkle and within Dentsu, this wonderful sort of like alchemy that happens when you are able to mix really smart technologists and engineers with really bright and creative storytellers and designers and experience designers. You can create experiences that are far more powerful, I would argue, than any advertising or any messaging. And you can actually build a brand entirely and a business entirely on the back of a really, really wonderfully delivered experience or service. And so I did that at Sapient, and my job sort of like changed from being the person who created these things himself to being the person who helped other people kind of like create these things, to being the person who actually helped basically structure creative departments, or to kind of do this stuff, and then to being the person eventually who was in charge of having to blend creative departments or experience design groups from companies that Sapient was purchasing or merging with into like one large experienced creative community. And when you kind of have that experience, all of a sudden people look at you differently. People like way outside of the experience design world. And they saw me, I think rightfully, it sort of helped me see myself in a different way as someone who actually could architect and create a new capability in a business, and someone who knew how to structure studios or teams or wolf packs, sometimes I would call them, that were self-directed, that were full of creative people and experienced design people who could like basically be self-directed and create these experiences for other customers. And I knew how to run a business profitably. I knew how to grow a team. I knew how to recruit. I knew how to build the reputation. And so that starts to kind of become, ironically, the role of a chief experience officer. And so that's essentially what happened there. I moved into Dentsu and Merkle, and in my current role, I'm doing a lot of that, right? I've merged 6 companies together. I had a small company that I was a part of that I sort of did a turnaround with a bunch of very smart people, and we sold ourselves into Dentsu and Merkle. And I've been playing this role now for several years in Dentsu and Merkle, and it's just up and up and up. It's a lot of fun, but there are moments of reflection when you kind of look back and you go, wow, I'm a long way from the person who actually used to design things or write things. A lot of times I'm talking about securing budgets and figuring out structure and talking about sort of like sales plays and how do we package our services and those kinds of things. I love it. It's a lot of fun, but it's been quite a journey. And I would argue it's the journey that everyone who's entering this field right now is probably going to go on themselves, right? There's going to be a plan, and then something dramatic's going to happen, and you're going to pivot, and then there's going to be a plan, something dramatic's going to happen. And just be flexible, just be like future ready. And I think you're going to be able to kind of climb up. And if you are business minded and really enjoy that aspect of the job as well, I think you could become a CXO. If you're not and you really want to focus on the craft, there are other avenues that are incredibly important and amazing to do too. So that was probably too long. I probably said everything. I was probably supposed to pause in the middle of there. Yeah.
No, it was great. I think very inspiring as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I mean, after hearing if you look at it, it's been a great evolution as well. I mean, it all started with focusing on the product. Everybody focused on the product, right from Sony Walkman days. It's like, build a great product, people will find a way to use it. Then I think Amazon shifted gears in terms of focus on the customer. Then people started talking about the NPS, customer satisfaction, all those things. And then things somewhere early 2000 or 2010, things started focusing on CX or customer experience.
Yeah.
We have to look at even unboxing became a thing. So it has to be an end-to-end experience. It's not just building a product. But interestingly, I think what you talked about in your journey, it seems like you were saying, it's instead of doing tech in a creative, hub, taking creative into a tech would probably build that connection between product, customer experience, and the whole how do brands deliver it, where we look at, creativity along with tech. It's no more left brain, right brain. It's bringing it together.
Yeah. I think that there have always been really, really smart business leaders. And if you really look at what made them successful and the philosophy they had for their business, I would argue it's always been a relentless, almost obsessive focus on what customers actually need and how we can actually solve their problems. And that the people that actually are only mediocre or fail are much more inward focused. Like, how do we make this product better? How do we make this sort of, in other words, like I would argue Henry Ford was basically a CX practitioner. He was like, we really need to figure, like, people cannot afford these things. We have to figure out, how do we make this something that people can afford? How do we make this car something that actually is rugged and sort of able to work for, people in the time? And, and ironically, he's probably more famous for like the manufacturing process and things like that he really sort of like perfected. But I would argue the origin, like the big idea or like the organizing idea for like the Model T back in the day, was actually solving customer problems. And I think you see that over and over again. Jeff Bezos obviously has been very, very public and relentless and consistent about talking about the only thing that matters is the customer. But I agree. I think that is the right mindset to have if you are leading a company right now, if you are a startup and you barely have any customers, or if you are a giant company. And what I find in our business, most of the time they're calling us just because they've lost that self-awareness, that they're no longer focused on the customer. They're more focused on themselves. And if you're designing a new website, if you're creating a new app, if you're creating a new digital experience, what you often uncover is that many of the choices that these big companies are making are based on like internal metrics. Well, we have to release 6 products this year. We have to do it on time, and we have to have this new product out because I promised the board we were going to do it. And not the customer actually has this other problem we haven't solved yet. And so the role of everyone, I think, in CX is not just to create things that are focused on customers, but to kind of remind these companies, these brands, that actually should be their number one priority. A lot of times I think we talk about how there needs to be an overlap between, in the Venn diagram of like, the business needs and the customer's needs, and that little football shape in the middle. That's what we should be doing. I actually think you almost need to ignore the business needs. And you need to be exclusively focused. I think you need to be exclusively focused on the customer's needs. Because ironically, if you focus that much on the customer's needs, the business stuff takes care of itself. And I think when you try to thread the needle sometimes too much, you end up coming up with a slightly interesting product for customers and not an essential one. And that's what you really need to win these days. You need to create something that is so helpful and valuable, it becomes essential in their lives.
But is it also, I mean, is it also true that some brands are, struggling in this because they're not really clear where does CX fit in the organization? Who owns CX? Is it the CMO? Is it the CTO? Or, do they need a CX coach? I mean, for example,
Yeah.
not many brands have a CX role yet. I'm pretty sure they're soon going to have it, but they're not sure that where would CX fit, because everybody is working to maximize their, I mean, working on local maxima, but not looking at the overall Uber problem, that are they solving the customer problem creatively? And
Yeah.
that's, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, no, I think you are right. I think that I think it's a lot better now than it ever has been before. And in big companies, especially, I think people really have recognized that the experience is the product. The experience is the brand. The experience is the service. And that's the number one thing. And so I know it's kind of popular to talk about, well, these people don't understand customer experience. I actually do think that they do, and they realize it's important, but they're struggling on more like the how. And they're because their companies are so big. And when you're so big, you have to kind of like divide and conquer with your organization and your leadership. And so much of it is, how do we kind of get this huge organization aligned on this thing that we all know we have to do, and we all know it has to be better, but it's like the how. It used to be that I feel like you had to almost have these fundamental conversations with CMOs or even CEOs about, hey, the product's important, but it's the experience you're surrounding the product with that actually is going to be the difference between winning and losing, in what we at Merkle call the experience economy. And these days, I think it's much more around, CMOs are really savvy. They have, in some cases, the largest technology budgets of the group. And they have, in many instances, built pretty sophisticated CX teams in-house. But a lot of times what they're struggling with is there's so much work for that team just in sort of like business as usual, that they can't make progress on like these larger initiatives they know they have to make. And they're so jealous of these small, nimble, startup-y companies where their one advantage is they don't have the bureaucracy. And so like a lot of time, I think what we do is we have to step in there and help them put a process in place with a little bit of outside-in thinking. It's the advantage of a Merkle, and help them move a little bit more at the speed of a startup. And how do we sort of help free up some of their people that are really smart to not just be doing business as usual work, but to also help constantly invent the future of their business, the future of their customer experience. I think that's really important. The other thing is, I mean, to sort of get into where you're at a little bit, I think that we are finally entering the era of data-led design, and sort of like data-led, not just reports and insights in a loose sense, but actually truly being able to do, real-time design, real-time personalization, real-time customization, and truly sort of have like data-led customer experience. And so I think it's going to unlock a whole new level of CX design over the next year or so.
True. And I think that's also going to be need of the hour, because if I look at the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, I mean, they have never, I mean, they were born with the internet, so they have not seen that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe for even me or my parents' generation, we would still find, the hyper personalization a bit creepy, but for them, it's BAU. I mean, if somebody is not personalizing, I mean, it's BS for them. It's like, so I think, yes, that's the need of the hour as well, where people are now focusing on how do we, I think, not just look at data, but then start using an application as well. And I'm consciously not using AI right now. I'll probably use it in the later part.
Well, we all know what you're talking about. But look, I think you are right. I mean, I see somewhat generational differences in the way that people are willing to either give up information to get more levels of personalization or not. But I also see, I mean, the biggest difference I see is just sort of around what I call web fluency and some willingness there. I was actually I just spoke at one of our large clients last 2 weeks ago, actually. And this is a group, it was like 200 people in the room, very smart client, very smart business. And this is the group of people who literally are doing personalization in this business. And we did a survey ahead of time about how much information about yourself are you willing to give up to get a higher level of personalization? And even in this group where it's their job, you had some responses are like, I will tell them nothing. I don't trust anybody. I'm not going to tell anything. And then literally other pockets of people who are like, there's no level of of information I'm unwilling to give up if I can get a better experience. And so you get these bipolar sort of like opposites, even in a group that kind of understands exactly what's going on. I kind of go back to focusing less on sort of like populations of people and more on the service and the quality of the service itself. If you are actually delivering real value,
right,
and unique value, I actually think people will let you know quite a bit about themselves to get that value. Like the difference between hailing an Uber and hailing a cab at 5 p.m. in New York City on a Thursday, back pre-Uber is so vast that I'm kind of willing to let, a company like Uber or Lyft actually know an awful lot about me. Honestly, I'm never going back to that. And so that's what I think there are kind of equivalents to that in a lot of customer experiences. If you can provide such a level of convenience or service or sort of like instant knowledge or security, I do think that there's sort of a give a little, get a little that you can get out of any generation or any level of sort of like web fluency individual, because the service is going to outweigh that.
True.
That
And
fear.
and I mean, you're right. I think people would probably be willing to do that barter of giving away that information if they see that value. I mean, more than the brand just using my data to sell things to me, rather than using my information to understand my problems better and then serve me. Like one of my guests spoke about that. I mean, building a great CX is more about understanding what are the moments that people have in their life, because people are on a mission. My mission could be it's my kid's party, or it's my wife's birthday, or if I have to go to the bank to get something done. So I'm on a mission. Now on that mission, where would the brand fit in, or how that brand can help me do certain things in a better way? I think that's the barter that people would be willing to give, and 100%.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I do think that we're at an interesting moment, though. If you think about it, sort of classic CX design was very much around identifying sort of these micro audiences, building sort of typical customer journeys to identify exactly what you're talking about, like these moments that matter. And then you can create experiences to serve them exactly the right service, the right information at just the right time in exactly the way they need it. And it's wonderful. But I would argue we're actually entering we're already in a moment now where we can know things even beyond that generic journey, where there's ways of kind of like understanding exactly where they are, and the number of moments that matter can go into the hundreds or thousands, right? There can be these micro moments that we can kind of, because these things are becoming more conversational, because these sort of experiences are able to capture even more data in real time and potentially evolve literally what the experience is in the moment in real time, that even kind of the classic journey mapping that a lot of what you're talking about we used to do, or we still do, I think that's going to evolve now, and the whole thing is going to become very real time.
But does that mean, I mean, since you also come from a creative or an creative uh, background,
Yeah.
do you think it's gone are the days of personas where we marketing campaigns, they define a particular persona and then target their campaigns or build the campaigns around that persona? Because now it's more about moments. I mean, in my persona, they could say, somebody who's working 5 days a week in, let's say, in analytics, very health conscious, go to the gym. So what can we do? But I could be the same person who's doing binge drinking on Friday and Saturday. Probably when I go back home late Thursday evening, I'm ordering Chinese food. So
Yeah.
I mean, I could be everything, all the personas. And then typically when
Yeah.
they, I mean, again, coming in from an analytics perspective, and they size the persona and it comes out with 100 people in the entire country
Yeah.
with exactly those
I
personas.
think I still think that personas are a valuable first step. I think it helps sort of set sort of like big picture decisioning for how an experience should work and how it should feel. Probably maybe more importantly, how it should feel to that brand.
Hmm.
But I do think that the old way of kind of doing journey mapping and the old way of thinking about personas or archetypes or those kinds of things as like, this is why we're going to make all of these detailed design decisions. I think you have to have a much more flexible view of it right now. And so the value of being able to recognize not just, what this persona is that you're kind of interacting with, but you can actually potentially know a whole lot more about that person, where they are, what they're doing, what things they've done recently, and you might be able to kind of better serve them um, based on that data than by some sort of generic, well, they kind of fall into this like archetype individual, and this tends to be the service that we want. And so what I think about these days is, for big picture planning, I think it's important to do this journey mapping, to do this persona work. But I do think that we are designing things more and more to be able to kind of pivot in real time. And so, like, if you start to get into things like AI agents and these conversational experiences and advisor kind of like services, that is not led by like, oh, it's this persona and this is the moment. It actually is led much more by sort of a big if then sort of decisioning tree and, LLMs that you can train
Yeah.
to kind of really make smart decisions within kind of the parameters and the service parameters and the brand parameters that you build. And to me, that's fascinating. I would argue that's as creative as anything else that was sort of planned for and kind of designed based on some big picture persona and journey theory. But I actually think you're going to enter that we are now in a new level of service where the experience can react so personally to me that it doesn't, I don't want to be typecast, I guess, by my age and where I live and the persona that a brand might think I am. I'd much rather be having interactions based on, frankly, this really intelligent model that a brand is kind of able to build about me, about exactly what I need in that moment.
But taking it one step ahead, now when we're building those experiences, how do brands
Yeah.
balance between physical and digital experiences then? Because although yes, I mean, through the pandemic, the whole digital adoption probably was on steroids. Everybody moved to digital, but people always had that itch to go and do physical shopping. And even in a physical setup, physical store, you have much more control in terms of how do you curate that whole experience, because a
Yeah.
customer's so many senses get activated as compared to
Yeah.
a digital e-commerce where everybody's just trying to be like Google white spaces, focus on CRO.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody is probably converging towards building a very similar experience. So how do brands balance between? And because another dimension is that there's so many digital touch points now. For example,
Yeah.
I may go to a KFC or a McDonald's. I'm looking at the menu, standing in the queue. There's a kiosk, and
Yeah.
then I have the app as well. So I have the option of all three. And
Yeah. Yeah.
interestingly,
Yeah.
I spoke to one of my guests on the podcast. He's the CTO of KFC UK. He said we focus that the kiosk and the app experience should be very seamless. So the customer should not feel that I have to learn a new platform. It
Yeah.
should be
Yeah.
exactly the same. So Do you think I mean, yes, it becomes very complex, but then how do brands balance between the whole? They want the physical part, but digital will give them that leverage of doing, the whole personalization,
Yeah.
all those things.
Look, I think as much as I am a digital guy, and the things that I talk about with brands are very much around the kind of services or the experiences, or in some cases the products that can be uniquely delivered and served digitally. If you step back and you kind of look at the world, like here in the US, in the height of the pandemic, where literally if you walked into a store, you could die.
Mm.
Online shopping never got above 19% of total commerce in the US. It capped at 19%. It couldn't even get to 20%. And that was when, there was like the fear of getting sick if you actually walked into a store. That's how much people
So it surpasses
love
the survival instinct.
physical experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here we are, you and I are, talking about the digital world, which is really important. And the digital and the physical world blend crazy, obviously. But let's not forget, like, stepping into an environment of a physical store is an experience.
Sure.
I was just talking to the ex CMO of Neiman Marcus, and that is a huge part of that entire experience. Is you walk into these branded spaces that are fantastic, that are wondrous, and that is kind of a part of what people want to buy. They want to experience that. So we do a lot of work helping people sort of build physical experiences that are sort of infused with digital, talking about how loyalty experiences and, virtual shopping experiences interact with people who are actually in the aisles of stores. You talked about KFC. We do a lot of work with, speed through line, which is really, if they're honest with themselves, that's what they're trying to do with the touch screens in store, or with the mobile ordering, or with, frankly, a lot of the digital displays that are happening in store or in drive-through. They're trying to get more accurate ordering and sort of faster through line with those experiences than if they just sort of have the old traditional things. And yeah, you're right. If you do it well, one experience should train you how to use another experience. So the app experience should train a KFC customer how to use the touch screen and how to use or understand the mobile ordering displays and all that kind of stuff. That's just good sort of like web CX. But when you do it really, really well, you that digital experience actually makes the physical space inside of it even more magical. I like to kind of think of it. I think some of the places that do it best are often Disney and the amusement parks and Six Flags and Universal theme parks. And if you think about it, you can wander around these physical theme parks, which are beautiful spaces and experiences in their own right. But they all have these digital, usually mobile-based, sort of like layers to the park now that you can kind of reveal with your mobile device. You can figure out where the lines are shortest. You can kind of plan your day. If you have kids, they actually can find kind of like, Disney characters, sort of like in the park by looking at them sort of like virtually with their phones and stuff. That's actually a great idea and a great philosophy to have if you are a retailer, if you're a restaurant, if you are a store, any place that has like a really important physical environment. I think there's a lot of things to be learned from how these almost like amusement parks are sort of blending physical and digital.
And I'm sure tech has a big role to play, because now let's officially talk about AI. AI.
Ding. Okay, we've gotten there. Good for you.
Yeah. So now AI is probably the third dimension. There's physical, digital, and then there's AI. Because even in AI, I mean, first of all, I just want to also let everybody know that Barry also runs a very successful podcast as well, What Bubbles Up, which is focused on creativity. It's I mean, I've heard a lot of your episodes. I think it's more about bringing a method to the whole madness of how creative
Yeah.
ideas are perceived, executed, and you've had 5 successful seasons as well. So
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
congratulations on that. Uh, I mean, and I mean, I some of the things that which I heard from that podcast and coming up with those things is, even if you're coming up with something with AI, end of the day, it's going to be a human who is going to see that experience.
Yeah.
So even if brands are adopting to artificial intelligence, but end of the day, the whole personalization, the context, the whole experience should be that, yes, I'm not talking to a chatbot. Somebody on the other side understands what I need. It's not just it's an AI chatbot, so I have, as a customer, have to bang my head to find a way to prompt that chat to get the right answer or get to the right resource. So that
Yeah.
is also, I mean, is, I think, a new dimension which everybody is focusing, or probably not focusing on. Probably they're just focusing on how do we get to the whole AI bandwagon.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, there's a million things to talk about with AI. AI isn't a new tool. AI is an entire new era in creativity. I mean, it's the most significant change probably in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it because of so many possibilities and kind of ways that I think people who are able to kind of flip the script and kind of look at the world differently,
Yeah.
I think there's going to be massive opportunities for those of us who can kind of think that way. But I think what you're alluding to is like there's so much you can do with generative AI and some of these LLMs and ways that we can leverage AI to create things that are unique or create things so quickly, or sort of like recreate and recreate and recreate things almost like in real time. That the biggest challenge, I think, for a lot of people is actually going to be more thinking about what should we do. And so, like, there's been a number of guests that have come on What Bubbles Up recently. Shameless plug, whatbubblesup.com. Where they've talked a lot about like the folks who are computer science students right now and folks who are sort of like early in their careers, like the most important skill I think that people need to kind of gather is psychology and sort of understanding human psychology. I'll use an example. What I mean by this is like if you think about sort of a classic chat bot, which is usually like sort of machine learning, maybe has a little bit of, maybe we're starting to get into AI, but like you would write a prompt of a question and then it would sort of do that little 3-dot thing, blink, 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 blink. And then it would come back with kind of like an answer. And there would usually be like a little bit of a delay there, right? People were fine with that delay. And so, but things are moving so quickly, we got excited and we started to make a bunch of basically a human looking avatar, and it looks as real as the video that you and I are looking at each other right now, and basically added sort of a voice conversational experience on top of it, and essentially kind of did like a human like avatar chatbot experience. Everybody's doing these. We do a lot of these too. And what we found is you ask a question of this human looking chatbot, and it's the same amount of delay, the same length of delay before this chatbot responds with the exact same answer. But because it looked human and acted human, users got really mad at waiting for this human to respond in a way that they did not when it was just sort of a classic chatbot. So that's psychology. Do you see what I'm saying? Like we were like, isn't this awesome? We can evolve from like a chatbot that looks like a little form field to someone who looks like this really sexy purple-haired guy who can like sort of like talk to you and give you answers. But because of the way that we are sort of as humans sort of like to interact with other humans, people got annoyed having to wait for this avatar to respond. And understanding, I think that there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of nuances like that with the things that we can make with AI, the kind of experiences we can create with generative AI and these LLMs, where we're going to, the success and failure of them isn't really going to be a technical problem anymore. because kinda
Right.
anything's possible now. It's going to be a human psychology problem. That's what's going to determine the success and failure.
More on the
I don't know.
application.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just was.
No,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
just think that's exactly what I think we're going through right now. I think over and over again.
Because I think in one of your episodes of your podcast, one interesting analogy was it's like invention versus innovation. Because
Yeah.
invention is creating a new thing, which, for example, it's AI, but innovation is
Yeah.
the application. I mean, it's like, I
Yeah.
think you spoke about that. If it's like giving man fire is invention, but innovation is making dinner with that fire. I think
Yes.
that's probably where we
Yes.
are with AI. That it's more about what do we cook on top of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm patient, and I think everybody ought to be patient. I mean, I saw a quote from somebody, one of the Y Combinator guys, who basically sort of talked about, like, look, all of the businesses that we associate with the iPhone, Uber and Airbnb and all of these sort of like businesses that are massive. And we're like, the iPhone created these businesses.
True.
Well, that's kind of true. But those businesses took years after the iPhone was released to even sort of start. And so the point there is all of these things here in sort of the very early days of generative AI and some of these tools, these businesses that are sort of popping up, these tools that are popping up, if the past is a lesson, probably none of these are actually the ones that are going to be hot. It takes us a little while to kind of figure out the real valuable applications of some of these technologies. And so, like, I would sort of be a little bit patient. I think we're going to have some really spectacular things come. I'm not convinced that a lot of the things that are flying around right now are the ones. And I think it's going to be fascinating to kind of watch what a lot of this technology unlocks.
And I think Metaverse is a great learning example as well. I mean, it started with a lot of promise and excitement, but then slowly it, fiddled out in a way. And
well, so it's a fascinating time. I think it's funny. We were just having a conversation a little bit with some of the folks. We're actually going to do an episode of Fast Currents in a month that we're calling Whatever Happened to Web3. But one of the things that's very, very interesting to us is the Metaverse launched, blockchain, all of these things kind of like launched with a lot of promise and a lot of hype. And then I think the buzz right now is, well, those things didn't pan out, and now they've been shadowed by all of this sort of like hype around AI.
Right.
The argument of our team is that actually right now, ironically, is we actually think this is Web3's moment. And so if you think about it, and you think about blockchain in particular, and the smart contract sort of like aspects of blockchain, and you think about one of the major problems that we have now with generative AI and how we are training these LLMs is that, people sort of feel like the things that they have written are being used to train these LLMs. The things that they have designed or created are being used to train these LLMs. And then these LLMs are creating things themselves, and the folks who created the training materials are getting no credit for it. The answer to fixing that is this smart chain contract blockchain thing here, where you can actually track ownership, and you can actually. And so, ironically, I would actually argue for all of your listeners out there, I think it's going to be a really interesting moment where I think blockchain and the smart contract aspect of that technology as a way to kind of track all of the materials that are being used to train these LLMs and potentially give credit back to those original creators. This could be the moment where Web3 finally, in my opinion, lives up to the promise that we sort of saw for it. Now, there's lots of other instances, I would argue. The Metaverse was a very cool thing, but then you would go to the client and you would say, like, hey, we want to create a Metaverse experience for you. It's going to be millions of dollars. And they're like, oh, yeah. But with AI now, you can actually go to the client and you can go, we want to create a Metaverse experience for you, and we're going to do it with generative AI, and it's only going to be $200,000. And they're going to probably go, great.
Yeah.
Because now it's at the price point where I can do it. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. Like, I think the Metaverse can come back now because generative AI makes it more affordable. I think that a lot of the things that generative AI can do can become more ethical because I actually think we can track ownership and credit through things like blockchain and the smart contracts that you can do there. I think it's a very interesting blending moment between these two sort of like waves of hype.
And I think slowly we're seeing that need in the world out there as well, because you're now looking at AI coming up with music. I mean, the whole creative field
Yeah.
in terms of even writing songs, even making movies for that matter, or let's say any creative ad or anything. I think that whole blockchain, I think, would probably help. I mean, legalize the whole thing, as in who has the rights, ownership over those
Well,
things.
yeah, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
I certainly think you could talk to 10 different people and get 11 different opinions on is generative AI actually quote unquote making music? Because I think a lot of people would say, no, it's not. What it is it's actually just sort of like reassembling other people's work to kind of make music. But I would argue that's kind of what music was already. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's actually in many, many ways this long sort of like standing debate around how much does something have to change and get remixed for it to actually become original art once again. So putting that philosophical thing aside, I'm with you though. I do think that there's a world with blockchain and sort of these smart contracts and the generative AI's ability to be trained on past music
Yeah.
and creating new music where that new Gen AI created music could potentially pay back the people that created all of the training materials that trained that model to kind of generate the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I also foresee Metaverse also coming back with and riding the whole gamification. I feel, wave, where how it can fit into how games are created, and it's going to be a great, even a retail experience for some of the brands to go and advertise, and again, that's something probably we'll see where it lands.
Yeah. Well, I think Web3 actually has been a lot of the wave of Web3 when you actually analyze it. I think actually has been quite successful in a lot of places. It just maybe didn't happen in exactly the way that I think a lot of the early hype cheerleaders sort of wanted it to. I think gamification has always been sort of like a really powerful part of every web experience. Do you know what I'm saying? What's funny to me is I can go into any financial services website and I can point out a dozen things in there that are quote unquote gamification. Like anytime you're applying for a home loan and you're filling out, page after page of like form fields and it goes like you are on step 6 of 9.
Again,
That's
human psychology,
gamification.
right?
Yes,
Getting those
that's gamification.
micro success moments.
Yeah, micro success moments. Anytime it's like going like, congratulations, you're on to the next step. That's gamification.
Yeah.
And it's smart. It's smart uses of it. I actually think there's a lot more uses of that can be a part of complex everyday life.
Yeah.
And it's good, smart human psychology.
Yeah, it gives me a sense of accomplishment as well, that yes, and I think that's what brands are also working on. Now, coming to the last and the most important section, which probably I should have brought up as the first section, is
Yeah.
creativity and CX. How creativity bubbles up in the whole customer experience design. Because in one of your podcast with Tracy Wong, who's the chairman, co-founder of
Yeah.
Wong Doody,
Yeah.
he talks about that creativity is about connecting insights. Again, what we just
Yeah.
discussed as well, that it's not just technology or platform, it's about emotions, intellectual connection with the audience, and then how do you look at all your past experiences, and in the context, then how do you create something new? And that's where, I don't know, if AI is going to help do that, that could be a game changer as well, in how we go about doing things. But do you see that? I mean, how do you see the whole creativity, in CX and with tech? How is it panning out, and where is it going and headed? Because there is a human element to it as well. Because end of the day, it's the human who's going to experience the brand. Even if you're creating
Yeah.
something, it's the human who's going to judge if it's a good experience or a bad experience.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that We are in the world of product design, service design, systems design, commerce design, product, or you know what I'm saying, experience design. All of those are creative endeavors. I would even argue, like, inventing a company, inventing a brand, inventing a new product or business. Those are creative endeavors. And so in sort of Tracy Wong's or my version of creativity, that's about people who have this ability to sort of sit back and sort of see connections between completely unrelated things that maybe other people don't see as obviously. And so that's a huge part of CX, understanding like how to kind of like find patterns in the world, understanding how to, to go back to your KFC example, how a mobile app experience can not only deliver a really efficient, frictionless sort of like commerce experience in the mobile app, but can also ironically intrigue you to explore the kiosk in the store or the drive-through, and or train you how to use those things. Like those are that kind of thinking about these two somewhat unrelated things is creativity. So like, look, you need to be, if you're going to be a successful experience designer or a CX practitioner or an experience strategist, you're going to definitely have to lean into your inner creativity. And I would argue, lean into and figure out how AI and those kinds of things can help, because AI isn't going to be more creative than you are, but what AI is going to be able to do is to experiment with more options more quickly than you can in your own brain. And so the creativity is really around sending those models off in interesting directions to like do millions and millions of permutations on those things that, in the past you might only be able to do dozens of, just kind of in your head. And so I think that moving forward, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to create things with AI and generative AI, and those things, when you sort of step back and look at them, are all going to look the same, and they're all going to feel the same, and they're all going to offer the same kind of thing. And they might be efficient, but that's not a winning formula. That's not a winning formula for a business. And the ones that are going to rise above are the ones that are going to have, at the earliest moment, someone who is really inventive and creative, sort of like sending those models off into very different directions to ultimately generate a highly effective version of something more unique. And so creativity is a huge piece of the puzzle here. It's not about you sitting alone in a room being creative anymore. The new modern creative team is you and an AI model sort of like working as partners, or as, another person I had on my podcast recently is sort of talks about like you need to treat AI like an intern, not like your boss, right? And so a lot of the things that you would have an intern do to help you kind of be more efficient and faster and explore more options, that's how to do it. But a good boss has to know what direction to give the intern, what sort of like tasks to give the intern, and what things to tell the intern to explore, right? And if you don't do that, then the intern's just doing busy work. And so you don't want these AI models to just do busy work. You want to explore it. So look, I think if you are a creative person, if you're a systems thinker, and if you are willing to sort of like try some crazy stuff, this is your moment. I think it's a great time to be a CX practitioner and to think about how you can be really creative with data and these insights you can get, how you can be really creative with building experiences that are hyper personalized and can kind of like pivot in a moment to deliver exactly the service that someone needs in exactly the right time. I think it's really important to kind of like not think of yourself as someone who's just delivering on a model, but someone who's like constantly challenging the model, constantly challenging what's possible, and trying to sort of connect things that a non-creative person would look at and go like, those two things have nothing to do with each other. Why are you trying to sort of connect those things together? That's creativity. I think that's what Tracy was sort of talking about. It's also why he likes to talk about how sometimes the best way to be creative is just to let go, just to sort of stand
I
up,
love that
walk
part.
away, and
It's all
and
running
your
in the
subconscious
subconscious.
mind is actually trying to do all of those things that I just described.
Mm.
And sometimes the best way for that is to go take a shower, go watch a movie, take a
Yeah.
walk, and you're going to come back. And it's why, and we've all experienced it. Sometimes the next time you sit back down, you just like, oh,
Yeah.
you cracked it. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. No, perfect. I think that beautifully sums up, what are the CX trends or what the future of CX is or also going to look like. So,
Yeah.
I mean, thank you so much, Barry, for all the insightful, discussion. I loved it. I'm sure all the listeners are going to love it as well. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Well, hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm honored that you invited me to have me on, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for doing this. And for all of you, go watch the podcast, What Bubbles Up, as well. It's on Spotify, Apple, pretty much everywhere. So go watch that. And if you like this, hit, subscribe to CX with Chopra, and we'll keep coming up with more such insights around customer experience. Thank you. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.